I'd like to thank the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat for listing our Secretariat Building as a finalist for the 2014 awards. We're very proud of our project, and we're honored by the recognition. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, John Gering, whose firm, HLW International, was a valued partner of the United Nations during the renovation project of the Secretariat, which is the iconic anchor of the UN campus. The goal of the Capital Master Plan, which has been achieved, was to renovate the UN's 1951 headquarters by upgrading and modernizing its infrastructure, restoring the character-defining historic spaces, respecting and applying the New York City building codes, safety and fire codes, and making the UN headquarters more energy efficient and sustainable, and of course capable of meeting a high standard of blast. During his entire tenure as Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon has sought to galvanize the global public, and especially its world leaders, to understand and reduce our impact on the Earth's climate. This culminated recently in September when the Secretary General convened the Climate Summit at UN headquarters, where more than 100 heads of state and government made new commitments, voiced new ideas, and offered new financing for significant actions to address the challenge of global climate change. But leadership begins at home, and in 2007, upon his election as Secretary General and at the very beginning of the Capital Master Plan, Mr. Ban directed me to identify ways to reduce the UN's own carbon footprint and to become more environmentally responsible. The Capital Master Plan provided us with that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to adopt modern and efficient technologies and reduce our power usage, water consumption, and carbon footprint. There were other important drivers to the Capital Master Plan as well, and a critical one was to improve the functionality of a facility designed for 50 member states in a family that has grown to 193 countries. Another was to make the headquarters accessible to all. The UN headquarters was completed in '51 in accordance with the New York City Fire Code at that time, which dated from 1938. Much has changed over the years, but up until 2010, the UN headquarters remained largely unaltered. Consequently, much of the complex lacked sprinklers, fire and smoke detection, and modern building management systems. All of this has changed during the Capital Master Plan. Although the United Nations is sovereign and therefore not subject to New York City building codes and other regulations, at the beginning of our project, we reached an agreement with city authorities to voluntarily apply the New York City Code to our project. We did not file for building permits or await certificate of occupancy, but the city agreed to review our construction documents and conduct voluntary visits, which were not inspections, to review our work every 2 weeks throughout the project. As the New York City firefighters are the first responders to any emergency at the UN, it is certainly in our mutual interest for the host city authorities to be familiar and comfortable with our facilities. A primary concern of the United Nations in the 21st century is security. Unfortunately, the United Nations has in recent years been the target of terrorist attacks in Baghdad, Algiers, Kabul, and elsewhere. On First Avenue, we installed blocks of bollards, among other security measures, and we added layers of steel and concrete over the FDR drive. Due to necessity, our project required significant improvements such as these to the security infrastructure to provide greater protection to the UN staff, visitors, and delegates. I can take you back to the amazing charrette that created the United Nations compound. The General Assembly decided in 1946 that the headquarters of the UN should be in New York City, and an international design team was selected and assembled by the UN, known as the Board of Design, with Wally Harrison serving as director. The board consisted of a dozen outstanding professionals, each representing a different country, including Le Corbusier representing France, Oscar Niemeyer representing Brazil, Nikolai Basov representing the Soviet Union, and Howard Robertson representing the UK. In 4 months, in 1947, the board hammered out a final design concept that was presented to and accepted by the General Assembly. The UN compound is generally unchanged from that concept, developed in just months in a design charrette by a dozen-person team that had never worked together before that and spoke no common language, except design. Their success is obvious. The UN is one of the few examples of 20th century, mid-century design, modern architecture, which is today recognized all over the world. The UN complex includes 6 buildings totaling 2.6 million square feet and houses approximately 6,000 full-time staff. The complex helped define modernism with its simple and sensual lines. Its generous use of glass and the incorporation of post-war high-tech materials like Norgahide, Formica, and stainless steel. And in the 1950s manner, it was sustainable, with east-west rather than north-south exposures, large open spaces, saved for the garden, operable windows, and many other green measures. Features such as the use of local materials were incorporated, not to save energy, but to allow the composition to fit in with nature in a more harmonious way. At the time it was built, the 17-acre complex was considered to be one of the most highly innovative facilities, employing many new technologies. The technology was cutting edge. The very high-tech glass curtain wall of the Secretariat was one of the first of its kind of that scale, later followed by thousands of buildings. The use of river water to cool the chiller plant equipment was also ahead of its time. But by the end of the first decade of the 21st century, our facility had aged and needed a facelift. Our mission was to manage the renovation of the UN headquarters in order to create a modern, safe, sustainable work environment. After years of debate, which began in 1998 and following approval in 2007, the construction and fit-out of temporary office space started. Throughout the years, we signed leases and arranged the fit-out of major blocks of office space in commercial buildings, mostly in Midtown, and in the vicinity of the UN compound in order to provide swing space for the thousands of staff that had to be relocated. We needed to build a temporary home for the conference building phase and then for the General Assembly phase, the temporary North Lawn building. This went into service in 2010. The Secretariat Building renovation was completed in mid-2012, and the Secretariat Building's first occupants were brought back home during the following few months. Infrastructure work in the basements was into its 3rd year when Hurricane Sandy hit New York City, damaging our equipment in the basements and causing a delay to the project. We accelerated our work with additional overtime and completed and occupied the conference building in 2013, and a few months later we emptied the General Assembly in preparation for its renovation, which was completed just a couple of months ago. The overall cost of the project was $2.2 billion, and it's presently just 11% over our original approved budget 8 years ago. The cost of the project was funded by member states of the United Nations through a special 5-year assessment. The funds are paid by all member states, divided with a formula that reflects the economic strength of each member state. For instance, the US pays 22% of the assessment because it represents 22% of the world gross national product. We assembled a highly skilled team of design and management professionals, including HLW International, Heinges, Perkins & Will, the Siskin and Hennessy Group, serving as our engineer, and Skanska serving as our construction manager, and Gardner and Theobald as our program manager. Our project challenged and changed many aspects of the UN culture, but none more so than the enclosed culture of the UN, offering instead open office layouts. We measure our performance within a variety of different performance metrics. Most importantly, we've reduced total energy consumption of the United Nations by over 50%, and we've reduced our carbon footprint by over 45%. We've also reduced our consumption of water by over 40%. All these steps will result in a very green, sustainable project. However, as previously stated, due to the international character of the United Nations, the project will not be certified by USGBC or any other system. The project meets the criteria of LEED's Gold and achieves higher ratings in the BREEAM system of the United Kingdom, the CASB system of Japan, and the Green Star system of Australia. These are all commendable and competitive systems, and I strongly support their basic concept, rewarding sustainable new construction. However, I must note that none of these programs provides proper credit and therefore encouragement for the single most important decision that a building owner makes, which is to whether to build anew or to restore its existing buildings. Recent news articles reinforce the worldwide impact of climate change. Its impact is quickly overwhelming the low-level occupants of our planet and will impact us unless we all take stronger action. I'm often asked by member states if it would have been less expensive to completely demolish and rebuild the UN. It's a reasonable question, and the answer is no. Even aside from the obvious loss of historic and iconic cultural values, it would not have been less expensive. And from an overall energy and environmental standpoint, it would have been a significant waste of carbon. By far, our most significant achievement in the area of sustainability is the avoidance of the expenditure of the embodied energy that's incorporated in our buildings. We recycled our buildings, and that was a victory for sustainability. The renovation of the UN demonstrates that even with this iconic complex of historic buildings, with conflicting budgetary, programmatic, and security demands, a high-level sustainable renovation can be executed while fully respecting the character-defining features of the building. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in the United Nations, and thanks to the Council on Tall Buildings for recognizing our project. And I now turn the clicker over to John Gering.
When we started the renovation of the Secretariat Tower, one of the first things we did is to establish some clear goals for success of the renovation. And the one goal that came to the top was to preserve the integrity of the existing complex. That was in direct conflict with what needed to happen going forward in terms of introducing new levels of technology into the structure. So one of the first things that we looked at is the footprint. It's a very long, narrow building. The end walls are solid. The long walls are glass. There were a number of constraints. As you can see, all the perimeter glass walls were flanked with closed wall offices, blocking views and also blocking light that has lack of ability to get into the building. The core was a fairly awkward shape, and if you look at the red lines, those are corridors, so wayfinding and circulation was fairly poor. If you look at the image on the left, that's 50 years ago. Look at the image on the right, that's 5 years prior to the renovation. Not much has changed other than a CRT on the right and a typewriter on the left. This building was built under the concept of the 1938 code, as Michael alluded to. It wasn't ADA compliant, had no sprinklers, very little fire protection. So one of the things we did is we stood back and developed a master plan with Perkins and Will on the program side, and we divided the building into 4 distinct categories. The base of the building is lobby space, cafeteria, support, and the remaining 3 chunks of blue are office space capped with a conference zone and a mechanical zone. We also overlaid the infrastructure on the master plan working with Siska and Hennessy. We defined vertical pathways, we defined horizontal pathways in a way that this building has never seen before. Looking at the existing core, you'll notice the yellow box on the bottom, that's the toilet core. It actually hugs the window wall. There was actually a joke at the UN, the best views in the house were at the toilets, because the reality was not many people had access to light. So one of our strategies was to clean up the core. We clarified circulation in a way that one can circulate completely around the core, and we provided capability vertically and horizontally. This is an example of a typical open plan, which allows natural light, which allows views to the outside, provides clear circulation around a reorganized core, and defines space for high wall space on the end walls, which are fairly solid. The image on the upper left, that's the restoration of the main lobby down below. These images are conference zones in the upper portion of the tower, as well as the open plan environment. Now looking at the outside, there's 2 systems on the facade. A very traditional system, which is the end walls, which is Indiana limestone on block backup. And then we have the curtain wall. The curtain wall was essentially a grid frame construction and a series of inserted double hung windows. This is one of the first of its kind. We had the Equitable building in Portland in 47. This was in 50, 51. Then we had the Lever House in 52. When one looks at the UN, most are familiar with the green-blue tinted glass. The reality is, as the image on the right, the original design of the glass was fairly transparent when one could see the columns. We worked with Bob Hodges, and Bob and his team were involved in the overall analysis and the design of the exterior window wall. A lot of corrosion at the window mullions. This is at the slab edge condition, where one looks at the anchors. 90% of these anchors had corrosion. Not a stable environment for the UN to go forward in. We looked at the slab edge condition. It actually looks like Swiss cheese. These are 4,000 penetrations in the edge of the slab. Fire hazard at best. So the UN had to make a decision. Do we repair it? Do we restore it with double hung windows? Or do we replace it? And the UN decided to replace it. That created a significant imposition on the structure. If you look at the blue zone, the structure PSI is 700. The yellow zone at the edge is 1750. Not fairly robust. And the design of this building, as originally designed, actually had a 2.5-foot cantilever on the edge. So what we did is we decoupled the design of the structure. We let the slab as existing take care of the dead load, and we inserted a series of structural outriggers as defined in red to deal with all the lateral loads, defining a composite system. We also looked at the interior curtain wall and the lighting assemblies in the sandwich. The sandwich was 12 feet, slab to slab. The ceilings as existing were 9'2". We maintained a 9'1" ceiling system by the nature of changing the structure above from 3 systems to 12 systems above that ceiling. We also looked at daylight harvesting in terms of how one can modulate shades and how one can modulate lighting. As the shades went up, the lighting went down. So in closing, if you look at the image of the left, the building was obviously built from the ground up because of phasing of swing space and move-in occupancy. We actually built the building from the top down. As you can see on the left, 10-floor zones of installing the facade and building the overall interiors that paralleled with that. And last but not least, you can finally see through the building, and it's fairly respectful of what the existing architecture was. And when I started the project, I actually had a saying with the team. This building was once a prince. It really turned into a frog, but I think we turned it back into a prince again. Thank you.